Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. Sending a warm welcome to everyone here with us today. This is the September webinar for the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Data Insights Network. My name is Amy. I work for QCOS, the Queensland Council of Social Service. I'm the Senior Data Analyst in the Research and Policy team. I'm the Project Lead, Coordinator and Facilitator of the DFSV Data Insights Network. We have Nadia online, our Research and Data Officer at QCOS, to support the webinar today. And we also have Taya online, who is our Events Officer. QCOS acknowledges the historical injustice of colonisation and dispossession on First Nations peoples and its ongoing impact and legacies. We are committed to reconciliation, self-determination and opportunity for First Nations peoples as integral steps in achieving equality, opportunity and well-being for all Queenslanders. I'm joining you from Meanjin in Brisbane and respectfully acknowledge Yagara and Turrbal people and all First Nations colleagues and friends online in the webinar today. We'd encourage you all to share if you feel comfortable in doing so in the chat, who you are, where you work, and to acknowledge country where you are joining today as well. For today's webinar, the webinar is 1 hour. I'll spend 5 minutes for the introduction and welcome. We have 50 minutes for the guest speaker presentations. And there will be 5 minutes for discussion and Q&A and polling at the end. A couple of details to note. By default, you will be on mute, but your camera will be turned on. This session will be recorded, so if you don't want your face shown in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off. The Q&A component of the webinar will not be recorded. If during Q&A you would like to ask a question, please include any questions you have in the chat pane. QCOS is Queensland's peak body for the social service sector. QCOS is also the state's interim DFV peak body for the domestic and family violence sector. QCOS is working toward establishing a new independent DFV peak by December 2025. For more information about the establishment of the DFV peak, please see the QCOS DFV Peak website or contact dfvpeak@qcos.org.au. The DFSV Data Insights Initiative and the network is funded separately to the DFV Peak. The Queensland Government has funded QCOS to deliver activities that aim to build and strengthen the data capability of the DFSV services staff and DFSV organisations, and internally within the department. This initiative also extends to sexual violence services and to services working across women's health, prevention, early intervention, crisis response and recovery. QCOS acknowledges the impact of domestic, family and sexual violence on individuals and families and communities. We pay respects to those who did not survive and to their family members and friends. We acknowledge and celebrate the work, strength and courage of the domestic, family and sexual violence sector, the outcomes that have already been achieved, and to all those who are part of this journey now. As a network, these discussions focus on domestic, family and sexual violence. The presentation components of the session will be recorded today, so if you need to step away, you're more than welcome to come back to watch the session at a later time. If you do find yourself in need of support, please reach out to your EAP, supervisor, or support service, such as the ones that we've listed on the slide. The purpose of the DFSV Data Insights Network is to improve the data maturity of the DFSV service sector, to ensure sector uptake of resources, and to enable the DFSV service sector to be positioned to enact people, process, and system changes as required through business readiness support and data strategy support. A reminder that the guiding values of the network are collaboration, transparency, a safe place to ask difficult questions, confidentiality, peer support, and innovation. The network adopts a strengths-based participatory focus that leverages, draws on, and values current knowledge, expertise, and capabilities that exist within the sector. Monthly webinars offer guest speakers and discussion on a range of topics to strengthen and uplift data capability in the DFSV services sector. The network fosters and facilitates two-way learning, where DFSV services can share current practices and processes on how they use data to improve outcomes for their clients, as well as the network sharing resources and data capability uplift strategies, ideas, and tips back to DFSV services to improve their practice. Over the webinar series, you can learn more about the value of data, data quality, data governance, and systems, standards, and good data documentation practice. I'm now going to provide a very brief overview of the DFSV Data Insights resources that are available for this initiative. We have a website page where you can find out more about the DFSV Data Insights initiative. On this page, there is also a terms of reference for the network, and we'll share these links to the website along with other resources for you in the chat pane now. We also have a Community Door Resources Hub page where you can access previous webinar recordings and access resources for the DFSV Data Insights initiative as they become available. You can read our guide for managers to speak about the initiative and share with your teams. And we also have approval to share 2 draft documents for the purpose of information sharing and further feedback, education, and training. And these documents are the draft DFSV Service Sector Data Governance Framework and the draft DFSV Service Sector Data Quality Strategy. These documents were the focus for our network webinar in June on uplifting your data quality, governance, and strategy. And we'll continue to reference these documents today and in future webinars. We welcome the opportunity to receive any feedback from the sector about the draft documents and invite you to connect with our team to discuss these resources further. In terms of the plan for the network, last month we held the 8th webinar for the network on leveraging DFV death review data for systemic change. Today is the 9th webinar in the series on understanding data maturity. If you're new to the network and you'd like to review previous webinars in the series that specifically link to today's topic, we'd suggest going back to the webinar topics on data strategy for impact and the uplifting your data quality, governance, and strategy. As mentioned, QCOS have coordinated and facilitated 8 network webinars so far. So these next 2 slides provide summaries of those webinars. If you have missed the previous webinars, we'll share the links to the recordings in the chat so you can watch these at a later time as well. Okay, so before I hand it over to Angkana, we'd like to complete a quick poll with everyone who is online today. This is actually the same polling that we completed in webinar 3 on data strategy for impact held in November last year. So we're going to display the Mentimeter on the screen now, and we'll share the results. And Nadia will also share the link in the chat for you to complete the polling question as well. So I'll just pull that up on my screen here. Hopefully you can access the Mentimeter code and access the chat to complete the polling. So to complete the question, it's asking on a scale of 0 to 100, how would you rate your own individual data capability? And how would you rate your organization's level of data maturity? If you can please complete the question based on your role within your organization. For example, I'm an analyst, and so I'd only respond to the analyst response option. Can everyone access the Okay, I can see some responses coming through, so you can access the polling, which is excellent. So we're just going to talk through the results for a moment as you fill in your responses. So what does the chart show us? The data displays where individuals and organisations sit on the 0 to 100 scale. So collectively, I think the results are showing what we've heard in the webinar series, that individuals are rating themselves with reasonably proficient data capability or fairly mature data capability, but also, however, score their organisations as not very mature or fairly mature. We can see those responses coming through now. So we have 22 responses. If you are one of the organisations that rated themselves with a high level of data maturity, we'd love to welcome you as a guest speaker for the network to share some of the insights on your data work in the future as well. So thanks everyone for completing the polling. We'll move on to the guest speaker component of today's webinar. So today we are grateful to welcome back Angkana Whiley, founder of Whiley Group Pty Ltd, who joined us for our network webinar back in April this year and provided an in-depth presentation on the value of data for government. She's here with us this morning to talk to guide us through this conversation on understanding data maturity, to explain the core concepts of data maturity, and share practical advice to help organisations advance their data capabilities.
Hi. I've just got to mute myself. I'm on the side. Okay.
Sorry, everyone. We would also like to welcome Jen Korn, Team Leader, Navigator Court Support and Supporting Adolescent Boys at Catholic Care Central Queensland, who will share their reflections on data insights and opportunities from improvements to at program team and organisational levels, and explain how they operationalise outcomes and apply evidence-informed approaches to service delivery and continuous improvement plans. So I'm going to hand it over to Anka now to step us through some practical approaches and tips to strengthen your data maturity. Welcome, Angkana and Jen. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Thank you. Yuma, everyone, from Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands here in Canberra, and I have with me a cat that's decided to click on my screen. Hi. Again, thank you so much, Amy and Nadia, for having me along the second time. I wanted to also pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and future, and acknowledge that this land does bear witness to centuries and millennia of change in the stories that our First Nations communities have shared with us, and that really does bear the mark of generations of data and information shared through voice, culture, songlines, and stories. And us here in this network, I think we absolutely are part of this wonderful ecosystem of storytelling. And so really grateful to be here to talk again about data and the importance of how do we uplift our data maturity. I want to start with this though. How many of us have started on a project where we've been excited about what questions we're going to be answering with our data, but really it takes us forever to actually get the data, or takes us forever to actually just get the data to a point where we can actually work with it, or don't have the tools that we need. And so we end up spending about 70% of the time looking for the data, working with the data, and actually just less of that time, this is my worst case scenario in my experience, 30% only of the time actually doing the analysis. And so what that means is we are spending more time working with the data than doing the analysis. So that time to insight takes a long time. And so what does that mean for us? To me, my direct experience is that there's a bunch of hidden costs in this. For instance, if you've got access to poor data, you might actually end up steering the decisions in a different path. And worst case, that path may lead to harm. And that's the worst thing that we would ever want to do with data. The second scenario is where you might not have access to the data in the right time. And so there's delayed insights. And so you might miss an opportunity. This is the worst case during an emergency, during a crisis when we need to get some resources allocated in the right place at the right time. And it takes forever to actually get that data to help with the resource allocation decisions. Or the other scenario is where maybe leaders don't trust the insight that's come their way, and we don't really know about the quality of that insight. So I might just put that to the side and make the decision myself. So then you go back to status quo of decisions being made with gut feel. But so what if we could flip that ratio and actually make it so that 70% of the time is spent doing the analysis and delivering the insights quickly to the right, in the right hands for the right decisions. And so this has been the core part of my work over the last 20 to 25 years in government, and then now as an advisor to government and not-for-profit organizations. This is just a slide that shows what this cohort, this network really understands. Why is it that we want to uplift our skills, capabilities, our infrastructure, our data maturity, so that we can inform decisions, so that we can bring the best possible trusted advice. And I've put some examples here around the sector-specific impact of having good data-driven decision-making processes. And I've been fortunate to build and design and also contribute to some of these things, such as building an evidence-based system where you can actually work with trusted data to understand risk and protective factors within communities, within community groups, in order to design prevention and early intervention opportunities. And so as analysts, we want to do this well. We want to make sure our insights are informing the best possible interventions and services. We want to make sure that we are building great data analytics models that are tracking what works, what doesn't work, and therefore what is possible in the future. We are also wanting to make sure that our deep analysis is working productively to inform divisions and target investments and inform the next best decisions that we need to make. And so what does that mean though? Because when we've got the 70-30 ratio, like this infinite potential just is not possible to be realized if we don't have access to those data and those capabilities, those infrastructures that we need in order to deliver on this mission that we have. And so I think in order to illustrate our data maturity challenges and why it matters, I wanted to talk about this because I've just been in the garden now that spring has sprung here in Canberra. We've got beautiful spring flowers everywhere. But we know that, many of us have had gardens and we've seen gardens grow to beautiful, wonderful spring gardens, but it doesn't start perfect. It does start with, this wild, woolly, weedy kind of land. And so it takes us time to move, to create, plan for, and produce this gorgeous, productive garden that we want. And so if we use this as an analogy, as a thought process of where is our garden, where are we at in our organizations in terms of data? And so from wildland to flourishing garden, I wanted to start with just a wonderful, simple definition of data maturity. What is data maturity? It is the extent to which an organization effectively manages, governs, and uses data to inform decisions and therefore achieve outcomes. Effectively manages, governs, and uses data to inform decisions. And so what does that mean in a practical sense, to manage, govern, and using our data? So this conversation today will give us some practical examples of what that looks like. Thank you so much to have Jen in the room. And then I'll get deeper into giving you some really practical tools that you can work with. But I wanted to also acknowledge that us in the not-for-profit sector, we live, work, and have contributed to community outcomes, to client outcomes for a very long time. Some organizations have been around for a very long time, some are still new. And we hear about these amazing AI-driven organizations that come in and just do work with their tech and their data so quickly. But we in the sector may be sitting on legacy systems, legacy processes, old ways of working. But we know that not everything needs to change. Everything is running smoothly, running well. We are building connections. We are knee deep in building trust with our communities. We are delivering services. And so as we continue to do the good work that we do, what does it mean to build the foundations of those data capabilities that we need in order to deliver the trusted advice that we need to provide for decision making? So we do acknowledge that some organizations are in the early stages of data maturity. Some are probably quite advanced. And so with that breadth of capabilities, this network is a really great example of the sharing that we can do in terms of understanding where we're all at and where we need to be. And so we also want to make sure that we are all building towards a common goal. And what does that fertile soil look like? The unlimited resources that we want. But really, we need to be able to understand where we are, what we do, practically and pragmatically. So before I go into showing a little bit more, I just wanted to talk about this data landscape that we persist in. Again, not all organizations are in the wild, woolly, messy of weed-driven gardens, and not all organizations are in perfect, structured gardens. So I think the core foundation of data challenges is about knowing where the data is, seeing what data looks like, and actually getting access to it, and then having the skills, capabilities, the tools to work with it, and then being clear that what is it that the internal processes that we use are going to be repeatable, and we will deliver the same trusted advice every time. So the systems we work within, the processes. So to me, there's 5 core things that we need to think about at the back of our minds when we think about data maturity. Can we find the data we need? Can we access it easily and securely? And can I trust that data? Is it accurate? Is it complete? Is it fit for purpose? Was it collected in a way that I can use it? Was it collected in a way that I can use it for this purpose? And importantly, have I got the skills, capabilities to use it ethically, securely, with consent? And importantly, the value of data is only raised to an infinite level if you can share it with colleagues, with our partners to co-create solutions for our communities. And so with that, I pose a question. And it's not really about changing everything that we do, but how might we cultivate our data gardens to support and amplify this work that we've always done to define who we are and the impact we make as analysts. So where do you sit in your organization to help uplift data maturity? Again, how do you begin thinking about transforming if you have a wild land with weeds into a productive garden? And how do we start together? Do we start where we are? Absolutely. Do we know what we have? We need to work to understand that, and then we need to work systematically to do that. And today you'll find some practical examples of that. This is a generative AI produced image that I wanted to illustrate what a wild, woolly, weedy garden community garden looks like, and right through the maturity journey to something that is productive and producing some really terrific fruits. So we've gone from wild to starting to being organized, to clearing it, to planting it and making sure we have some good fertile soil. And then we've actually planted our seeds, and we're starting to see some early good benefits of the seeds and the work that we've done so far. And then on the 2 on the right, we are productive. We are working very well. We are getting tomatoes and we are getting wonderful vegetables. But on the far right, we're actually quite integrated and we're actually working really well and efficiently. But what does that mean for data? So it is the same approach for data, stage 1 to 6. It is very much around where we start on the left is, hey, we've got data. Do we even have data? Through to, actually, I do have data and I think it's somewhere in a spreadsheet and it actually might be in an email. To actually, we are absolutely understanding where our data is. We are working with it. It might be all over the place. We're actually working with data very well. And that's stage 3. And most organizations that I've come across are sitting between 2 and 3. But it is when they start to think about data maturity and data strategy where we are starting to work into stages 4, 5, and 6. And stage 4 is probably our excellent place to be. If we get to 4, we're actually really doing well because we are working with data. We have dashboards. We are working with data every day, every month. We do reports. Every time we need to make a decision, we actually think about data too. It's 5 and 6 where we're actually starting to be really proactive about working with data in a predictive sense. We've got great capabilities. We've got a good infrastructure. And so with that, I'd love to introduce Jen Korn. Jen, over to you to hear more about your direct experience and your real-world insights in your organisation.
Thank you, Angkana, and thank you to QCOS. I will just share my screen. Hopefully successfully. So I'd like to start to acknowledge the Drummle elders in our region for past, present and emerging. And I'd especially like to include the elders that I work alongside as they continue to guide me with the work that I do while they remain the custodians of the land and of the river that myself and my family live, work and play on, and acknowledge the learnings that as a community and as agencies we need to ensure that we recognise and respect the Drummle people and their ways of working. And I'd like to acknowledge any First Nations peoples that we have watching the webinar today. I'd like to also acknowledge the diversity that we are holding in the audience, the diversity in the identification with how we define ourselves. If you need to draw or colour or fidget or even stand up and stretch, just know that whatever it looks like, this is a safe space. Please feel free to make yourself comfortable for the length of the webinar. As a recently diagnosed mature female ADHDer, I know that sometimes holding the brain quiet and being able to actually focus for any length of time can be super tricky. So please set yourself up to feel comfortable for the rest of the webinar. And then finally, to acknowledge the previous victims of domestic and family violence. Thank you for being brave. I've met some of the most bravest women while working in this sector, and they haven't been that they've stopped a speeding bus or taken on a robber, but they have made some of the hardest decisions to keep themselves and their children safe. They've had to show courage and rise above it all. You are the fuel, that is the why many of us stay working in this sector. To our current victims, reach up, speak out and surround yourself with people who can support and help you. If you aren't at that point yet, know that when you are ready, someone will be here to walk alongside you in your journey. If you can't find someone, yell louder until someone listens. The pathway is never easy, but a life free from violence is certainly a goal that you should be allowed to dream of. And finally, to our future victims, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we can't create a safe home for you to live in. I'm sorry that people will choose to use violence against someone that they're supposed to love. And I'm sorry that your journey is still ahead of you. My biggest wish for all of our communities and our sector is that we could all just be kind to one another. Hi, my name is Jen Korn and I'm the leader at Catholic Care Central Queensland. Rockhampton, and I currently lead 2 pilot programs, one being the Navigator pilot program that provides court support to victims of domestic and family violence criminal offences, and the second program is supporting adolescent boys where there has been, the young men have been either exposed to, are experiencing, are at risk, or are using family and domestic violence or family sexual violence. Thank you, Angkana, for showing us how to move through the wild land to a flourishing garden, and that it's actually possible. As Angkana has just shown, data maturity is a process. It's a process that involves stages. Trust me when I tell you that attempting to move from a block of unloved wild land straight to a flourishing garden doesn't work. You need to undertake the groundwork and the hard yards. Be intentional in your journey, and creating the passion in others will make the journey more enjoyable. The 2 parts we're going to look at today are taken from our real world insights. So I'm at the very beginning of my data journey, and that's what we're going to look at today, from a team, program and organisation level, and then looking at how do we use that information for future improvements. 12 months ago, I certainly never saw myself in a position where I'd be excited about undertaking the gathering of data, or even being curious about the narrative behind the data. And I certainly didn't see myself asking more questions of our sector. I didn't see myself having a desire to talk to people about collecting data and then constantly thinking about the information, how to source more information, and then wondering what comes next. I by no means see myself as a researcher. I'm just someone who was a little bit curious and then met some amazing QCOS people along the way who allowed me to actually look at what I'm doing, how to prioritise information, and how to make sense of my endless pieces of butcher's paper that were spread all over my office floor. I am someone that wasn't at all really sure about this part of data and how it played into our sector. And I just thought I'd found a point of interest and decided to put some evidence-based figures behind it, and that maybe somebody in the future could use all of that. What I never saw in the future was having to step outside of our traditional data collection methods to justify a program being refunded. Not only collecting program-specific data, totals and outputs, but really looking at the program impact for our community, and then using a narrative to support all the data that we've put together. We'll talk a little bit later about the Victim Survivor Connection Point project, which I started, and it started as just something that was a statement written in a book. I still don't know where that journey will lead me or our participants, but I am aware that it doesn't need to be me that moves those findings into maybe a fully fledged research project. The data that I collect and put together eventually will be for others to read, to analyse, and they can decide if somewhere, either in their program or somewhere in their journey, it may be an interest for them. And they can use the evidence that we've put together to save them a little bit of legwork. So this next is a bit about the reflections from actually being in a program where we're needing to collect data. So as workers in a program, we daily enter data into our recording systems, and that's often just where it ends. Data that's predetermined at the commencement of a program based around our funding criteria. And sometimes as the program matures, we add other data collection points. Mainly we collect our data to complete our monthly and quarterly reports. I report it, I justify the work that my team has done, and then I move on to the next quarter. When I head off to meetings with my data in my hands and I present our statistics, we hear then from other agencies with their statistics. And we all just sit there and nod our heads and go, yep, we're all seeing that same trends, we're all seeing the same data, we're all seeing the same things across our sector. But we then step away from that data collection and what to do with it. We get curious about the how and the why. We just don't, about the why, we get we don't have the time to stop and think about the how and the why. Thinking about the how and the why leads us to endless conversations and exploring and deep dives on the internet. And anybody who is on the ground working in this sector, they'll tell you that there just isn't space in our days to get sidetracked. So we pop our curiosity into a book, make a promise to ourselves that we'll get back to that one day, but does that actually happen? Do we give ourselves the time to think about where could that be used? Could we do a research project? Could we talk to others and get more detailed information? How could we share our data? And then we think of those and we never take it any further. I came to my data journey partly through curiosity, but also out of necessity. So the curiosity was a natural progression from being in the DV sector for many, many years. This necessity part is due to leading 2 pilot programs that I desperately want to see made into permanent programs. I had to create a starting point and then I had to find my why. So I started asking questions and taking more of a critical look at the outcomes required and how I thought that as a team we would get there. I started to talk to other practitioners to gain some insight, and then I talked within my own agency and our leaders, and I quickly realised that on the ground level, we are really early in our data maturity stage and we still have a lot to learn and to grow and to discover, so that as teams, programs and as agencies we can reach our full potential when it comes to data maturity. And for us, the data maturity isn't the same for our programs and our teams and our organisation. Each can be, and for us, we are at different stages. We each present with a different lens. We have separate buy-in reasons, and we've often got varied strategies about becoming data mature. At some point, all 3 of us will come together with a shared goal and vision, and the ultimate learning process as we look at traditional passive data sources and then learning to use more contemporary technology to analyse the data and integrating the newly created frameworks and assessment tools. And can data maturity be achieved without formal data collection? Well, the answer should be no. We should need to have comprehensive data, consistent collection strategies, and collaboration across the sector. But what I did find is that having a rural and regional footprint for our programs provides us the ability to say that on some level, as an agency, we don't look that far to gain extra data. We, within our own programs, have access to relevant data for our sector. We share our data effectively within our programs and with anybody that's doing our applications. And we use our own data for our funding requests. We overlay that with the fact that we've been supplying services in our community for 50 years and that we hold a substantial amount of domestic and family violence programs within Catholic Care. This has been a really successful program, a really successful strategy that has served our programs, our communities, and our clients. But my question is, how do we move away from the traditional funding streams and into seeking funding based on non-traditional data and research methods? It's an exciting time to decide that data increasing data maturity is something that I now take interest in, and leaning in and increasing our team's investment into capturing data outside of the normal program recording platform is exciting. It's exciting for everybody, and the ability to build skills using new applications and frameworks is something that as teams, programs and an agency, we've certainly got to look forward to. When we're talking about what do we do with all of that information, we looked at within our Navigator pilot program benchmarking, which is a really tricky concept when you are the only program of its type in Queensland. So when we're leading pilot programs, it's a really big part of, I suppose, our day-to-day is becoming evidence-based, collecting information, putting it all together, because you want to be able to show a funding body that your program it's effective, it has brilliant outcomes, it makes a change, and it has impact in our sector. History shows us that comparing all forms of data will help to create a benchmark. And for us, this is our team's chance to really have a look at the program from multiple different angles. It's a possibility to use more than our recording platform data and the excitement of actually finding our inner researcher. But the basis before we can start to compare our program against others is we've got to make the time to collect it, record it, and collate it. For me, whether it's sitting with a pilot or doing research to collecting data, I'm realizing that you have to have a little bit of bravery. You've got to be prepared to not take no for an answer. No only means no once. Go back, rephrase the question, ask again, bring some more evidence, bring back some better reasoning, and reapproach. I don't think there'd be any of our researchers in the world, or even in our sector, that have taken the first no and gone, actually, I don't want to take this any further. So using that bravery to lean into it. Sitting in a pilot program where evidence is everything for a final review, I quickly realised that if I was to invest myself into the team and to our program, we could see the benefits of hopefully one day having this program rolled out across Queensland. How do I go about showing funding bodies this concept and that this program is worth the dollars and that our victim survivors are worth the investment? It was time for me to lean in on the relationships that I have in the sector and time to create new relationships that would benefit our benchmarking. It's also time to show where the program has data that can't be benchmarked against others, and then looking at what evidence we can then put forward with that. Using coffee and cake to encourage people to come along on the journey works 99% of the time. Speaking to people outside of your state, looking at evidence across Australia, wherever there's evidence that has been supporting clients. It certainly wasn't for me 12 months ago, but now my heart of hearts tells me that this is where we need to be. Be really open, transparent, and honest about your intent when you're asking others along on your journey and letting them know what your outcomes are. For me, one of the big places that I've lent with is the QPS in Rockhampton, our Vulnerable Persons Unit. So their information is obviously very confidential, but for them, it wasn't about that. It's about them letting us know when relevant data is available. It's their team saying, hey, this is a really piece of research that's been done. They start conversations. It's them having the conversations with other police stations that are outside of our region saying, hey, this is a program, they're wanting some of your data. This side of data collection is continual. There is no end to data collection. The program data maturity is then what you do with all of the data, the systems that we use to compile it, and how we then share our findings. Biggest take home was be curious. Allow your curiosity to run wild. Encourage others to be curious. Curiosity will lead you down the garden path to collecting data, wanting more from your data, and exploring how you can bring your agency along on the journey of data maturity. Our little program, the Victor Survivor Connection Point, is a little side program that came out of I've been in the sector for a lot of years and dipping my toes in and out of the court system. I was able to re-enter the court system within this role, and I was seeing perpetrators that I saw 15 years ago, only that now they were with different victims. So I was wanting to have an understanding around, if I could see this, were our local girls, ladies that were dating, were they able to see these behaviours? Were they able to see red flags? Were they choosing to ignore that. What was their reasons for wanting to be with partners who had had extensive domestic and family violence backgrounds? That was the first questions. And from there, it just escalated. It didn't take long when you're sitting in a domestic and family violence unit we have 5 programs that you're going to ask yourself lots of questions. Working in the court systems where we're focusing on breaches of the protection orders and criminal charges provided another view, and then also being in the domestic and family high risk space provided another lens completely. Then having constant conversations with the QPS, our vulnerable persons unit, looking at how do we explore this further. So this little project is based on a small cohort of female victim survivors who I've had conversations with, and that has just developed. I wanted to keep the project separate from my work to make sure that there was never going to be any conflict. The data that I started to collect actually came from a Facebook page, which is, yes, a strange place to collect it from, but there was all these pages of females talking about ex-partners, new partners, mates, family members, and I wanted to start putting that together because what I could see is that our perpetrators and our victim survivors were staying in the same friend circle, and I really wanted to get a bigger understanding around why that was so. So started with 1 young female. We're now at 5 in our group. We meet regularly, coffee and cake, and just really honest conversations, trying to get an understanding around what's the safety for them around having the same friendship circles and accessing partners out of that same circle. There's been some real honest feedback, which I didn't see coming, around why this occurs. And some of it is our female participants wanted revenge against their partners. They felt safe being in that family because it may have been that the partner's mum had been kind to her. So why not date the brother? He may have the same feelings and kindness as his mum. The familiarity of being in a circle, you have the same friendship friends with the female. So even though you're moving and using different males that were perpetrators, you continue to have those same females that were able to provide you safety and someone to talk to, and you knew they knew the situation. Where will this project go? I'm not sure. We're going to continue to collect our data, collate it, and then we'll just see where it goes. And finally, our journey was very simple. We started with a small group, then lots and lots of butcher's paper, creating a really messy spreadsheet. Then came across our gorgeous QCOS team. So it was originally Tracy and Amy and Nadia, and I was provided with this amazing feedback about what to do with all this data that I was collecting. And then I discovered and was introduced to the Kuma process, and it develops, you put all your information in and it will actually develop a beautiful way for your data to be displayed. And again, it's all a work in progress, and in our resources there will be links to all of the where we've gathered our data from and the processes and the different apps that we've used. Thank you very much. I know I've taken up too much time, and I'd like to hand back to Angkana now, who's going to take us further into the gardening process.
Thank you. Jen, that was wonderful. And really, I think what you've highlighted is curiosity then sparks. From necessity comes curiosity, which then sparks this stream of inquiry processes that you went through, particularly around engaging with the community, engaging with partners to co-create this incredible process of questions and answers, and then underneath that, the data layer, the collections that you've had to consider, the new ways of working. So I think what you've highlighted wonderfully is that data maturity just does not happen by accident. It happens by design, and it happens with starting this understanding of where you're at and then being deliberate and systematic about where you need to be. And then absolutely with that gradual, consistent improvement, you compound the growth and maturity, which is fantastic stories. Thank you so much. And I think what you've also highlighted for our community here, our network here, is that's great. It's lovely to hear your story. What does that mean for me? How do I apply these lessons? And the reality check for me could be that, you know, I still don't know where to go. I don't know what to do in terms of finding the data. I don't necessarily know what the quality of the data is, and so on. So I just wanted to bring us back to a little bit more around the frameworks that we have available to us to support us in uplifting our data maturity, and coming back to very briefly talking about what does actually low data maturity look and feel like, and importantly, what does actually good look like. So I've got here red, which means, you know, we don't want red, but I've talked a bit about this already, and you've clearly highlighted that. We need to be able to know what we want to look for. We want to know where the data is. We want to be able to think creatively and alternatively about finding the data, collecting the data, accessing the data, but importantly, working with it in creative ways. And so I'm just going to move to the green, which is what good looks like, that we know what we have, we know how we can access it, and that we can responsibly work with it and share it. We can absolutely trust the quality because we've worked very hard to make sure we can trust it ourselves. We know we have the foundational capabilities to do that, and we have safe, secure systems. I mean, I have worked with many organizations that still, because you are engaging with communities, you have to work in butcher's paper. But the data on a butcher's paper in a drawer does not benefit anybody. So how do we actually take that data and put it into a digital form that we can use it and reuse it in these wonderful data processes? The blue is what I'm highlighting here are some of the typical elements that help us uplift our data maturity. We've talked about data governance already, so there's a significant body of work here, and I'll come to a slide in a minute where we have some wonderful frameworks we can leverage. But roles, responsibilities, and having a strategy, whether it's a data strategy or your organizational strategy that has data within it, is really critical. We understand the risk, security and privacy of the data because we work with people in the most critical, vulnerable stages of lives, but it's just human data, and ourselves, we need to make sure we are working well with that data. So then in terms of data discovery, there's a bunch of capabilities, and I won't go through it now because I've got another slide, but I'll get to this slide, because I wanted to acknowledge that nationally, internationally, both in the public sector, private sector, there are many frameworks, tools, resources that we can use. And Jen has mentioned that QCOS has a whole bunch of resources that are already really helpful in us working together to uplift our data, whether it's one data point at a time or building a strategy out, which is wonderful. We also have this draft Queensland government's documents, the Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Service Sector Data Governance Framework and the Data Quality Strategy. These two documents are provided to us in a draft form, and I really commend them to you to absolutely get into and understand, because it does set the scene for us. It tells us the what, it tells us the why we need to work better with data using these wonderful capabilities that's outlined in these documents. For instance, it does give us detailed outline of the roles and responsibilities that will help us make sure we are working with data well. The other thing I wanted to highlight is Queensland Government also has a couple of new capability documents. One is called the Data Maturity Assessment Tool, and that at the moment is being trialled in Queensland Government, but will be made readily available. And also the Data Capability Framework, which talks about me and my role and my skills and my capabilities. So again, this is about helping you uplift your capability, which as a cumulative effect will improve the quality and maturity of your whole organization. But I wanted to come back a little bit to the garden idea. And it is because for me, these frameworks, there's many, and they're all really fabulous. But I have synthesized them over the years into those 5 key things I mentioned: discoverable, accessible, trusted, used, and shared. As a heuristic, that's a really nice thing to think about. And I've just created a little acronym, Data Sport, is something to think about when you're thinking about your next project, for instance. The port part, I haven't talked about yet, but let me go into it a little bit. While you're making your data discoverable, accessible, trusted, used, and shared, there's different maturities within that. But also you need the people skills. And Jen, you've highlighted absolutely that is something that you have taken ownership of in building your skills, moving from service delivery through to being a data researcher even, but absolutely building your skills. But having those operations, you mentioned process, the detail of how you go from questioning to actually then working methodically to answer the question, questioning and working methodically to build the data collections, the data processes across its entire life cycle. And then importantly, the responsible work with data, the governance, the rules, the policies, the detail that is in the data governance framework, the draft document. And then, as I mentioned, the technology, data sit in everywhere around us, but they're most usable and repeatable and can be built to be trusted if they sit in digital tools, in our technologies, and worked with. So again, Data Sport, I think there's just a really nice little simple framework for you to use. And in this pack, you'll receive it later. I've given you some more information and very happy to come back and have a good conversation with you about each one. And I've given you really practical points around what does it mean, what each part of the DATUSPORT means. But as Jen mentioned, she has some wonderful examples of when you work creatively, curiously, you find your why, and you build in those partnerships around the data, around the question, around the why, then you actually build a wonderful mass, and that's how your maturity lifts over time. And I showed you the wonderful progression of stage 1 through to 6. Use that as a way, as a guiding light for you against the Data Sport. So for instance, where are you in your organization in this space of, do I even know where my data is? Do I know who is the data steward or somebody who owns this data who I can work with to make sure I understand its quality and so on? So working and questioning where you're at will help give you this lens of where are you along this continuum. Are you in the stage 2 or are you in stage 4? And the purpose of this is to help you work through methodically to uplift your practices, uplift your processes. And again, I've mentioned in the pack, I've given you some detail of what are some of the really quick win things that you can do, really quick steps. So here's an example. I'll just pick one. I'll pick the Discover because it's the first one on my left. Discover. What data do you have? Let's just identify what are the critical data assets for us. We serve the community, we serve our clients. So it's their data is really important. As well, it's my data, HR data, finance data, all of our internal back office data is just as critical as our front office data. So being really aware of that and knowing who owns that data, who's responsible, what we call data stewards. And then let's work to understand this data. What is it? What are the different elements of it? And then through this process, you can get through and understand the data, but also then you can work through all of the other steps. So that was just a starting point, but I just wanted, I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say, let's be clear, the data are not just numbers. I'm actually a qualitative researcher, and so I'm an evaluator. So I work a lot with qualitative data. But these lives, these stories, these opportunities that we have through these data and data stories is really critical for us. And so working with this type of framework will help you work through where are you at with your maturity, where is your organization at, and then how do we work through methodically improving one thing at a time, pulling one weed out at a time, as I've put there on the screen. And then importantly, over time, we do eventually uplift and build the sector's data capability. And so this is my wish for everybody, and it is very much how I live and have worked in the public sector and as a consultant now for over 25 years, is that when we make data discoverable, accessible, trusted, and responsibly shared and used, and that our staff are skilled and capable, we know our roles, we are backed by the best possible tools, and we feel truly empowered by our leaders to value data as an asset, we can challenge status quo as Jen has done. And we can use data more effectively and efficiency in our everyday, and therefore the potential is infinite. So then with that, I end and I hand it back to Amy. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Angkana. Sorry, I was on mute. I was just busy responding to all of the questions that are coming through in the chat. So I know I have mentioned that we'll go a few minutes over time today. We'll just work our way through the questions that are coming through. Thank you, everyone. And we'll take them offline and respond to them individually as well. We just thought we'd also do another quick poll based on now our understanding of what Angkana has walked us through in terms of the data maturity stages. So what she's outlined in terms of our understanding of data maturity. Now, where do you think you would rate your organisation's data maturity stage? So thinking about those stages, the scale ratings. There is, again, the stage 1, which is unmanaged, wild, overgrown, all the way through to stage 6, which is optimised and an integrated farm. We thought we'd just end on a fun poll just to kind of cement those learnings of what Angkana has shared with us today. We also do have a Survey Monkey in the chat as well. We would appreciate if you could complete that too, just to provide some feedback on the session today and how you think how we've gone today. And we'd appreciate any feedback in the chat if you'd like to share it that way instead also. So I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to complete the polls. Thank you for staying online and completing that feedback for us.
This is looking nice, isn't it, Amy? We've got quite a wide range of wonderful gardens and gardens to be. And I'm loving this optimized integrated farm. I'd love to hear more about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Are we like using AI to look at where the weeds are? Or, I don't know. I'm thinking of ag tech. They use some really amazing tools and data to make sure that those farms are producing. The robots, so they've got a lot of robotics.
Okay, well,
this is a really nice, it's a nice blend and a lot in the middle there, which is really excellent. Really great.
I might just jump back into our slides to finish up the webinar today. So please, again, feel free to contact our team if you'd like to share your own data story with the network, or if you have any questions from the session today, you can contact us at DFSV Data Insights at qcos.org.au. And yeah, thank you everyone for staying online and engaging in the webinar and today's discussion. We hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week, and thank you again for your interest in the network, and we really look forward to connecting with you again soon.